This is a long testimonial of the infiniteness, boundlessness, and the mercy of God. It is probably best to start from when I joined NSPPD in August 2024. Even though up till then, God had shown his hand. On June 22nd, 2024, I was diagnosed with subarachnoid hemorrhage. That long name simply means ruptured brain aneurysm, which is a medical emergency. There are several statistics out there on its outcome. It is stated that about 10 to 15% will die before reaching the hospital and within 24 hours. Another 40% will die even if they make it to the hospital and within 1 month. Further, it is stated that another 3 out of those who survive will suffer disability of one form or the other. This testimony, therefore, is about glory to God, his infinite size, El Roy, who elected to belittle the case for me. It started with symptoms of severe headache, neck stiffening, my mouth feeling guarded. It was a thunderclap of headache, which was very intense and came suddenly when I was entertaining people at home on this fateful day in Cairo on the 22nd of June. I spent about 2 weeks in hospital in Cairo where I received treatment, including inserting a stent. But I still had crisis after I was discharged, such that I had to be evacuated to a London hospital where I received further treatment, a reinforced stent for another 10 days to 2 weeks. I was discharged with advice to return for checkup in 3 weeks. I was grateful to God for healing, for lucidity, and for wholeness at the time. And because I hadn't been cleared to travel, I took a train with my family. My kids had come to meet me in London. They had just vacated from school. And we traveled by train to Paris to begin recuperation. But here comes the story. 3 weeks down the line, August 2nd, I returned to London for the scheduled checkup. And then the scan revealed that the brain aneurysm had not closed. That was a rude shock. And according to the doctors, I had 2 doctors. According to them, according to the radiologist, he said the blood in the brain was still filling through what he then called a back door. Well, they kind of explained to me what the options were, and they followed it up with a written report. They gave me 2 very scary options, which were really no options at all. The first one was to retreat the aneurysm by using a certain balloon, inside it somewhere there, and to divert the flow. They were, doctors. They also told me that this option, while not being certain, also had the risk of a stroke. The second option they presented me with was to do nothing, because I was due to return in 6 months anyway for a further checkup and see what happens. They were also quick to let me know that that option had the risk of loss of life. So like I said, there were none options. There were options that left me with only one option. My husband and I were initially frantic, but at some point we said, you know what? Let's see God at work. The only option the way we elected for was to wait and seek the face of God, face him squarely. At some point, that we knew that this was a battlefront. At that time, I had heard of NSPPD, well before then, but I never joined. Well, during this period, one of them came back to me and said to me, why don't you join this platform? And given where I was at the time, well, first of all, I had a lot of time because I was recuperating. I had been totally taken off work. I was now fervent. So I joined NSPPD fervently, with wholeheartedly, on Monday, August 5. At this point, I was still very fearful. I realized that I needed a stimulant for my prayer life and for my faith. Look, I was acutely mindful that God had shown himself strong all through the ailments that was still alive. But the fear that I was facing at that time was palpable. It was crowned with sleepless nights by virtue of the options that I had or the risks that had been presented to me. And that was to wait on God for 6 months, where they had already told me that the risk was loss of life. Anyway, like I said, there were no choices. So August 6, Pastor Jerry spoke of peripheral artery disease and the root of negativity drying up. I have a lot of these things written down because, like I said, with a lot of time on my hands, recuperating, I was tuned in every day. August 7, the Lord has shown me mercy. He also prophesied and said, Roy, let all stubborn challenges, let terminal diseases be terminated. So the prophecies came on and on. August 19, he said metal plates were disappearing. August 20, he said nothing will go wrong. Whatever represents failure in your life is swallowed. For this cause, you were raised by the power of God. All of this, of course, I had volumes and volumes of books that I wrote down, prayer lines and prayer points and prophecies. So the prophecies came, I was just noting them down. I was noting them down in faith, knowing that a day like this will come. And somehow, I kept on praying. And while I knew that God was speaking to me all the way with several prophecies, open wounds drying up, and I was embracing each and every one of those things, the word that came. I was still praying for a distinct prophecy about brain, a distinct mention about brain aneurysm. And for God to give me a case that showed me that indeed He was seeing me. August 22nd, the word came that the negative report was changing. It's also in that same prayer, it's also talked about, well, even though it was talking about negative report changing, of course, I claimed it for aneurysms to be sealed, to be closed. Restoration of my career, restoration of purpose, revival, utmostly, of my spiritual life. He also announced that I threw away fear, threw away all the ailments. I prayed and I shook off all the doctor's reports. And on August 22nd, I traveled back with my family to Cairo from Paris. They still did not give me a clearance to fly after that 3-week review and after those scary options. And anytime I asked them whether I could fly, they scattered around it. The doctors scattered around it, and they'll go into telling me that this is what the books say and what the books didn't say. But anyway, I had a mantle. I had my mantle. I put it on my head all through the flights, and I guess returning to Cairo was the beginning of the miraculous journey. It was a step of faith that I had to take. So the next day, the Lord said, I'm going back to release power. Kanayo, you're going back to release power. I received it. I begged Him to use me as an instrument in his hands. Even though at that point I was struggling whether I should resume at work. I had just returned home so that my kids could resume at school, but I hadn't resumed work yet. So I was still contemplating. Because 6 months wait could either mean you resume work or you stay at home. The allure to stay at home and do nothing and keep yourself safe, the allure was strong. But then I felt well. How does somebody sit at home when you feel well? Then probably go into a pity party. Then sit at home and wait. No, I did say, I remember that word. Kanayo, you're going back to release power. And that was all I needed. And I decided to resume. And that day I wrote my president and I told him, I gave him a date on which I will resume September 12th. But in the interim period before I resumed, I continued, my prayer sessions on NSPPD, and I just continued to battle and face God. If I can rewind, I remember 27th of August, I also, the prayers were that you are a God of fear. Fear is a pharaoh. You placed me as a God in the marketplace. Though they rise against me, they will be ashamed. So at that time, it was now fear of going work and getting into mental work, getting into hard work. So was that going to be a challenge or not? Again, aneurysm-related ailments were called by Pastor Jerry. Aortic, hepatic artery, hepatic aneurysm. It went on and on, as well as all sorts of brain diseases. But when I checked, every time they were called and I checked all of these things, they were different from subarachnoid hemorrhage. And I kept asking, believing God for a message that spoke of brain aneurysm or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Still, every day, I remember on September 3rd, the message was, the Lord said to ask you, why are you afraid? If they did not touch you then, how can they touch you now? I had to then, and that was it again. And I would wonder and ask God, please deliver me from myself. These messages were really profound and they were for me. And then came September 5, and there was a testimony of a Ronke in the UK who testified that the brain aneurysm was reversed. That testimony and the associated debrief that came with it was it for me. It was the evidence that I needed. I tapped into her testimony and ran with it. The following day, which was September 6th, the prophecy was, you will not die. It is settled. What you were afraid of will not happen. However, a few days later on September 9th, and as guided by the man of God, Pastor Jerry, I wrote my testimony, at least up until September 9th. But I wrote the testimony for what happened from June 22nd, but I also wrote the ending of the testimony. And that was that when I go back in 6 months to do the scan, that my brain will be normal with no trace of aneurysm, and that the feelings that they had seen earlier will have closed. And there'll be no more feeling. Hallelujah. That's how I closed that testimony. On September 11, on the platform, I then made a vow to God. I said, Father, if you will heal me, I will give you all the glory and the entire world will hear of it. Not just from now on, and not once, forever. I think that was all the, in a sense, spiritual shock absorbers, fortifying me and giving work and fortifying my faith, so that I can take the leap. Which was that on September 12th, I resumed at work after almost 3 months of absence. But I can't tell you that the battle was over. Because as I continued to pray to God, I continued to remain prayerful as much as I could. I know that when the time zone changed, the platform moved from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in Cairo, so it was a bit difficult to follow. But as much as possible, I did. But the enemy never stopped reminding me that I was running a risk of loss of life. It was not yet 6 months for me to return for the 6-month assessment. On my part, I never stopped reminding God that I had resumed at work, that I had acted in faith, and that I had shared the testimonies of His glory. And that I had projected my testimony. And I continue to proclaim that brain aneurysm and all its associated consequences were reversed in the mighty name of Jesus. That was a constant prayer. And of course, I continue to receive strength, encouragement, hope, from the prophecies on the platform, for the prayers, for the words of encouragement. So that message, what you are afraid of will not happen, was a constant message. It was profound for me because I was indeed often afraid. On October 10th, I was to have an interim IBDSA, but here in Cairo. The only reason I wanted to have an interim IBDSA was in a sense to accelerate the evidence, because I was a whole lot more confident, but also it will help me sleep at night. But regrettably, the radiologist said to me they don't have the experience and the technique. But I guess everything works out for God, for good to them that love God, that they actually do have the evidence and that they had used it on me when I had started the treatment at the outset. Then he wrote a note to the doctors in London, said to them that asking for other alternatives and whether those other alternatives and other mechanisms could be used. I wasn't so much worried about that because at this time I had begun to believe that I was already healed. I had enough testimonies, enough prophecies, enough spoken word, enough proclamations directed at me. But with the enemy, he never stops. He will come with his wiles, but where is the evidence of your healing? How are you sure you have been healed? Fast forward to November, my brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother, Emmanuel, started championing and conceiving a Thanksgiving in Lagos on my behalf. And they even set a date of 29th of December. But of course, they're planning it because, unknown to them, my matter was medically unresolved. Remember, I was living on 2 options, but those 2 options were only known to a handful of people, not more than 4. So when I went to do the review from Paris, my boss at work, probably that was all. But I had to let them continue to plan, because it was all part of the faith journey. What did well, anyhow, I started looking for ways and means. So the scheduled 6-month checkup would have been on January, but I decided to bring it forward. So I wrote the doctor, neurologist, and said to him, since the interim IVDSA assessment couldn't hold, can we do the 6 months earlier than 6 months? And he jumped on it. As soon as I sent the email, he came back and said, why not? What date are you looking at? I quickly switched my prayer points on the platform. I started praying for a report on December 20th that showed the reversal of what they initially saw. It was one of my communion prayers that day. On that fateful day on December 20th, my evidence was delivered. I underwent several rounds of scans at the hospital in London. And I remember the nurse or the attendant asking me, would I love music while they are doing the scans? I said, yes. I said, which one? I said, the steadfast love of the Lord that never ceases. That song kept on playing as they were running their procedures. I had gone into the procedure at 11 a.m. on the 20th of December, and by 2 p.m. I met with a doctor to review the scans. And doctor said to me, I was even already starting to complain about something else and service, when he said to me, Sawani, I have good news for you. All aneurysms occluded. I sat back and I said, what does that mean in layman's terms? He said, it is all closed. All aneurysms closed. He then went on to say that I can now go and sleep peacefully. You too, Mrs. Awani. And so you can imagine what will have kept even a doctor awake for 6 months, carrying a burden for somebody else. And the pastor will ask, how would you celebrate? I was numb. I was numb. Numbness in awe of God. I still am numb. I'm still numb by this God and why he elected to have mercy upon me. So my sister and I ran into the car, went to the hotel where my kids were, and all we could do was burst into songs, into this particular song. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning, new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord. Great is thy faithfulness. The Thanksgiving held gloriously on December 29th to the glory of God. And this is an acknowledgement of how this platform helped me on this faith journey. I know a host of saints were praying for me. My spiritual family in Cairo and in the Middle East, by the way, we're all praying. I had no doubt in my mind. My immediate family as well, my children, my husband. But there comes a time when you have to get on your own knees and battle. I had to get on mine. I needed to overcome fear. I needed the encouragement of the word. I needed I needed faith. This testimony is coming very late, actually. It's almost a year to June 22nd. It's almost a year in a few months to my sojourn when I started joining NSPPD on August 5. I wanted to come physically. Even at the time I was in the battlefront, I also wondered, but if I came and did it physically, would I have time? It then, making a video, then began to seem like the best proposition. The one thing I knew was that I needed this platform to fulfill my promise and my vow to God. And that was to share it to the ends of the earth. And I do so today with an immense heart of gratitude and thanksgiving. Thank you, Pastor Jerry. I cannot thank you enough for this commission. I cannot thank your entire pastorate enough. The oil on your head will only continue to increase. And may our good Lord bless you beyond measure. What God cannot do does not exist.